ministerials, a man come to be our guest speaker. Brother Black had him come. He is now our general superintendent, but at the time, the reason why Brother Black brought him in was because he was head of the Wesley Seminary that had just started. Indiana Wesleyan University did have a ministerial program before, but then they started a seminary program. And incidentally, maybe you didn't know this, but the seminary building, not entirely, but was mostly financed by Dave, and I can't remember his last name, but he owns Chick-fil-A. His daughter had gone to IWU school, and he was so impressed with the school, and he wanted to give, and so the seminary has a lot to thank for that gentleman. But I thought, well, I really wanted to go right away, and I put it off for a couple of years, and Brother Black said, Paul, he said, it won't get any cheaper, and he said, you're not you'll never get any younger. So I thought, well, maybe I'll try it. And I mean, the first week, oh man, the grade didn't come back that I really wanted. And I thought maybe I bit off more than I could chew. Maybe I should quit before I even go a step further. But I finally was making such good grades that Dr. Weitzel said, Paul, he said, you really don't have to study that hard. And I said, well, anything less than my best is less than what I think God would want me to do. And he said, well, from that perspective, but he says, there's no such thing as magna cum laude, summa cum laude. There's no valedictorian. That's in baccalaureate, when you get your bachelor's degree. When you go for a master's, nobody cares what grade you made. Did you pass or didn't you? Did you have your master's? And I said, I don't even care whether I have the degree. I just enjoy studying. And but anyway, one of the classes that I took was the leadership of Wesley. And to take that, we had to go to London. We were retracing the footsteps of John Wesley. I had bought a brand new camera before going over there, and I took about 1,200 pictures, and most of my family has not seen one of them. There's a few that they've probably seen. But when Pastor Steve asked me about doing this, one of the things that I thought of right away is, why are we Wesleyan? And then you have the three great philosophical questions. Who am I? Why am I here? Where am I going? Well, as Wesleyans, who are we? Why are we here? And where are we going? And I'm not sure if they've, that has the slides on the left, but usually that'll go full screen. So if you, let me think, you start slideshow, and then from the first slide, but I'm ready for the next slide. But anyway, okay, that's the answer is kind of the first question is, who are we? We're followers of one of the greatest evangelical movements since the early church. Next slide. Or next. Okay, and why are we here? We're basically here to propagate that message that the founders of this movement had, and then where are we going? Let me explain this one. This is determined by the laws of mathematics and physics. What does that have to do with faith? What does that have to do with religion? How many have taken any geometry at all when they were in school, grade school? Do you know what a point is? You know what another point, and then you draw a line between the two. That's a line segment. Now, if you go beyond that line segment and put an arrow on the end, that is a ray. In mathematics, that ray extends indefinitely that direction. And you can, if you know, now that's the laws of math, but the laws of physics, we do it every single day when we're driving our car. If it takes 50 miles to go 1 hour, how long does it take to go 100 miles? 2. somebody was doing one of these things where they go to all these universities and ask kids these questions, and I had no idea. I thought, what did they do? Oh, anyway, yeah, we heard so. But anyway, even in faith, unless there's an altercation of the course, you can either change direction or you can change speed. But if you have a point A and a point B, and you know how fast you're going, traveling, you can pretty well predetermine exactly where you're going to be at any given moment of time. And if you think of us as a church, where we are, that would be point A. Or maybe let's go back 5 or 10 years before I was here. Where were you at point A, and here we are at point B today? The direction that Mitchell Wesleyan has gone. If you go another 10 years, you can pretty well see where the church is going to be 10 years from now. Now you can alter the course. Well, we haven't had as many conferences as we ought to do. Well, then we might have to change some direction. You understand what I'm saying? And don't go away from here tonight saying, oh, Paul doesn't, you know, I'm against tattoos and all this here. I'm just going to give you this illustration to just share with you. I was talking to a fellow in jail in my jail ministry, and he literally had more ink on his body than he had bare skin. And this is what he said to me behind the bars. He became a Christian. He said, Paul, he said, I'm scared for my kids. Okay. He said, look at what my parents would have been against this, but he said, look what I thought was legitimate. And if my parents were here and I have got more ink than I don't, what in the world are my kids going to look like? He got that idea. Now, I'm not saying I'm totally against. I'm just trying to tell you in theology, in what we are and who we are as a church, you can pretty well predetermine the direction the church is moving if we don't alter one way or the other in a certain amount of time exactly where we're going to be as Wesleyans. What I'd like for you to do is just take a journey with me, and we're going to begin that journey this week and go over the next few weeks here. And so we'll go to the next slide. I offered my wife to go with me. She said no. She said I would just as soon keep 2 feet planted on soil. You know, she didn't want to fly. And now our oldest daughter got married to a pilot, and he flies one of the smaller. He's just airport manager, assistant airport manager, Madison Municipal. And actually, they got the new title, Madison Regional Airport. So they actually have ability for more grants and things like that, higher status. But he got her up in one of those little planes. I said, if you can ride one of those little ones, you can ride a jet. I mean, that's more comfort. You don't have all the noise and you can't even hardly talk yourself. But anyway, Reuben, my son, was at Kentucky Mountain Bible College at the time. And I thought, well, if my wife doesn't want to go, I would offer to take him with me. And while I'm getting seminary credit for it, I actually talked to some of the teachers there. I said, can you get baccalaureate credit for that? And they said, yeah, we have actually a course in John Wesley, and so if he'll take notes and come back and write a report, we'll give him credit. And so Reuben and I left the Louisville International Airport in a plane about like this here, and we flew to Washington, D.C., the Dulles Airport. And next slide. And we're kind of leaving New York City, and we're going across the pond right up here. And we went to Heathrow. Why did we go to Heathrow? That's a good many miles north of London. When you start looking at travel agents and stuff like that, prices change almost every day. And I happened to hit a day when it was cheap enough to go to Heathrow and ride the train down to London as if I would have just flown to London. I thought, I'd get to see more of the countryside, so why not? And so that's what we did. But we left the Washington Dulles Airport there in Washington, D.C., and then you can see we've got almost 6 hours. We've got about 6 hours of flight time. And by the way, you can take your seatbelts off now because we're at about 26,000 feet. Next slide. And the outside, we got about 3,500 miles to fly, and it's negative 47 degrees outside. So you thought it was cold before you came in tonight. No, that wasn't cold. That's cold. Anyway, next slide. This was interesting to me. I mean, I get off the plane, and it's just like a mall where they get off right there in the airport is almost like a mall. And isn't it amazing how everybody aspires to be something else, or not who God made them, but something a little bit different? We maybe aspire after some of the fashions that Paris had. Now it's Hollywood. And the very first thing Ruben and I saw when we got off, American apparel. So they're aspiring to be like America. Nobody's satisfied with who they are. So no extra money for that one. I just thought that was funny. Anyway, and right actually near the airport, with just a short walking distance, the train terminal. We took one of those Virgin lines down. We go to the next one. I didn't do my planning quite right, and Ruben and I ended up sitting here for about 1 or 2 hours. The train we were actually on that took us this far actually was going the whole way to London. And it was empty. We could have probably stayed on the plane, but it wouldn't have been technically legal because our tickets didn't have that time stamped on it, and it was cheaper to go at a later time because during a certain rush hour, the prices are higher. And so we didn't want to pay the higher price, so when I got the ticket, I thought, oh, I'll just wait. And I thought there might be things to see, and there was nothing in that area, so we just sat. I had some collateral reading that I had to do for the class that hadn't got done yet, so I actually read about a book and a half while I was there, and I think I finished all those requirements. But we got on the train and we finished our journey to London. We'll go to the next one here. This is where Ruben and I stayed, and I don't know if you can read there. It's the Highbury Center. The Highbury Center was a mission at one time. And it's so funny because in politics, many of them are far more liberal than what we are here in America. But yet, discrimination is not one of the areas that they're particular about. This Highbury Inn is an evangelical Christian mission, and now it is like a motel for Christians to stay at. And you have to be evangelical. You say you're Roman Catholic, they won't even board you overnight. They can discriminate. They can say who stays there and who doesn't. But it was the most reasonable place to stay in all of London, and it was a Christian organization, and we really enjoyed it. We had a great time. The next picture is actually the full building, and we'll move on to the next slide. Ruben and I went up to the room where we were going to be staying. We kind of just threw our luggage on the beds, and then we went downstairs. Next slide. And that's Dr. Bob White. So he taught most of a lot of the courses that I took there, 3 or 4. This was the 4th course that I took that he taught. But we met with him and as well as the other students and had some orientation that evening. Then we kind of had the rest of the evening off, do whatever we wanted, but basically our journey in the land of Wesley would begin the very next day. In the next slide, we'll see that as we got up in the morning, you go down to the basement, and they had a cafeteria and a buffet bar down there, and it was one of the best breakfast buffets of anywhere I've ever stayed anywhere. I mean, you could have all the oatmeal, fried potatoes, eggs, bacon, I don't know what else, donuts. I'm not sure what all they had there, but that was one of the, if you didn't eat then, you didn't get fed good. I guess if you go over to, I've never been to France, but I guess the food is better over there, but every place Ruben and I stopped, their food was tasteless, it was bland, it was just, it was okay. I mean, I'm not a picky eater. I can eat just about anything you set before me. But it was bland. There's just no flavor to it whatsoever. English people are not good cooks. At least the ones we were around were not. Last night we were there, we found a pizza buffet, and we said, we're going there. So we got something that was more what we liked. But anyway, we had a good breakfast the first day, started our journey, and we got on a bus. We got on the bus, we decided, hey, we don't have these in our area, so we're going to go up the top floor. And I didn't see it going up, but when you come down the bus to get off, the next slide, you'll see that some of their expressions are different than ours. You probably, again, can't read that. please mind your head. And so I took a picture of that, and you did, because you weren't careful going down those steps on that to get to the first floor and out the door. You could do some damage pretty good. But anyway, we did that, and I'm going to back up in our story just a little bit, because now we're getting into more of the John Wesley part. I wasn't on this leg of the journey, but this is Epworth. This is the church that John and Charles and their brother Samuel, but their dad Samuel Wesley Sr. was the pastor of this church. While we do probably more infant dedication than what we do baptism, they would do baptisms, and that was the area right there where John and Charles and Samuel Jr. would have been baptized at Epworth. Samuel and Susanna Wesley had 19 children. 9 of them died. There were 3 boys and 7 girls. I don't know the names of any of the girls, but I do know that Samuel was the oldest, and then John, and then Charles, I believe. But this is St. Andrew's Chapel in Epworth. And in 1709, John was just a little boy, but the parsonage was totally destroyed by fire. Everybody got out safely except John. And they saw him in the upper window, kind of flailing his arms, whatever. And some of the men down below, kind of with their arms, made a net, and they told him to jump. And he did. John survived. His mom always referred to the scripture as a brand plucked out of the burning. And she just really set her heart and her mind not only on John, Charles, and Samuel, but to do her best to raise them with rigorous discipline and to serve the Lord. So they had prayers. They had prayers in the morning. They had prayer times in the afternoon. They had prayer times in the evening. They had times of Bible study. And a lot of the methods of Methodism is probably attributed to their mother, Susanna, who was very strict disciplinarian and keeping things on schedule, and especially the spiritual disciplines. And so anyway, John is old enough, and he's going to be heading off to school. Next slide. So in the bus we were on, we have now arrived. Basically, the bell tower there is all part of the whole complex where St. Mary's is. Oxford University, that's the one I was trying to pull out of my head last night, and I couldn't think of it. But Oxford University, and there's actually another university there too. Lincoln College is there. And I was trying to, some people aren't aware of that, but the difference between a college and a university is a college of colleges. And so there's multiple colleges. And so when Marian College became a university, Indiana Wesleyan University, because they had branched out, it wasn't just ministerial now. Now we got a nursing program, and now we have a college of this and a college of, all different colleges within one campus. Once you're a college of colleges, then you're university status. And incidentally, IWU probably has a better nursing program than IU. But anyway, we're on our way to going into Oxford. Next slide. I thought this was unusual. You can't read that from there either, but that is called a posting box. Not a mailbox, a posting box. That's where you post your letters. And so some things are different. Another thing that you'll see quite frequently in London, the next slide, nothing is red and white. If it's emergency, it's green and yellow. And so there's an ambulance. If you were to find a first aid kit, like in the bus that we were in, it would have been in a kit that was green and yellow. So those things are different. The next slide, somebody had drawn a sketch of Oxford University, center and back, or maybe a little right center. You'll see a tower there. That is the church, the on campus. But Oxford University is just kind of built, and a lot of times we're going to be in the inside of it. So when you see some of the walls, maybe on one or two of the other pictures, we're standing somewhere inside. On the next slide, that's the waiting in line, paying to get in to visit. And the next slide, you'll notice that all of their people that give direction and such are very well-dressed, well-groomed. You rarely see any sloppy attire or appearance whatsoever. And that is not so much true of the regular workplace, but you go into London after 5 o'clock. Every business is closed. I mean, nothing is open after 5 o'clock. Everything shuts down. But everybody goes home, they get showered, they get dressed, and they come back into the streets, and they're dressed up like we would be, maybe not even, I shouldn't say that because we don't so much anymore, but they dress up like they used to dress up on Sunday to come to church. And I thought, every single night, they just totally dressed up, you know, and that's just their culture. They socialize. And I asked somebody at the Highbury Center, man, I noticed that everybody, whether we're running the bus, whether we're on a train, whether we're in the subway, nobody smiles. We found one group of kids and some of their chaperones from a Christian school, and these kids were laughing, they were having a good time, and their teachers were smiling, and I thought, yeah, they're a Christian. That makes a big difference. But I went back to the Highbury Center that night before we went to bed. I went up to the counter and such. I said, why is the whole country, you know, they don't smile. They're just very, very friendly. He said they work hard and they play hard. They work all day and they work hard. And then they get out in the streets and they socialize and play hard, whatever. But for the most part, really don't. But I tell you what, every time I stop somebody to ask directions, they're the most congenial people. They would stop, they'd be in a hurry. They run almost everywhere they go. You could hardly walk fast and keep up with them. There are signs on the escalators, stay to the right. Ruben and I were standing side by side riding up an escalator, you know. And next thing we knew, somebody was prodding us from behind. And they're literally running up the left side. And so they're in a hurry to get to work. They're in a hurry to do this, hurry to everywhere they go. And when they walk the street, they're walking at a fast clip. But if you stop them, they will stop. They'll take all the time that is necessary to help you out and share with you where you need to go. But yeah, it's just a whole different culture. Next slide, we won't stay there. But again, just this fellow's showing the visitors which direction to go, give them direction. We get inside. Beautiful gardens inside as we go in. The next slide is the inside picture like I was telling you about, and there's the chapel tower behind. And most of those rooms the whole way around are not necessarily classrooms, but dormitory or maybe staff housing. And we'll go to the next slide. This lady's the curator inside the dining hall, and the following slide will show you a little bit about the dining hall. John and Charles Wesley probably both ate in this dining hall. And incidentally, those that are still attending Oxford University during certain hours were not allowed in there because they still use that facility. If you also notice hanging on the walls the whole way around, it's just like an art gallery. And so kind of behind me and to my left, we'll see the next two sets of pictures. On the next slide. This is John Wesley. Now this picture here was above John. And I didn't get a good angle. I'm sorry I didn't get a better picture of that. But I had no idea. William Penn, founder of Pennsylvania, went to Oxford University and he was in that art gallery of one of their former students. Again, we're going to be leaving that dining hall area, and this fellow's directing us over to St. Mary's. Another picture of St. Mary's from the outside is coming next, and let's go inside. The next slide, we'll go inside. Much of what you see almost would resemble Catholicism, and there's a good reason for that, because one of the greatest experiments in history was not only the Pilgrims coming over here, but when more English came over, and they decided to have a free society where you could worship God according to the dictates of your conscience. Freedom they didn't enjoy years ago. They do now. But they didn't. When there was a Catholic king or queen, everybody's Roman Catholic. And if you weren't, off with the head. And literally, they sent them to the guillotine or whatever, or jail or whatever they do. And if a Protestant was king or queen, man, that was a state religion, and so it was against the law to be a Roman Catholic. And so a lot of the things, a lot of the places we went, St. Mary's, St. Paul's, they were all at one time Catholic cathedrals, but because of the latter dynasty from Queen Elizabeth on down to Charles today and such, they're Protestant. They own those buildings now, which were formerly Catholic, and so that's why you'll see a lot that resembles Catholicism in some of their places. We're going to leave that area and go over. There's a pipe organ there in the back. Not a real good picture, and I'm not sure exactly why those seats were where they were at as far as location. But now we're going to move over to Christ Church, which is still also part of the Oxford University complex. John Wesley, and then Charles Wesley on the bottom. Students of Christ Church, leaders in the Methodist revival, ordained in this cathedral. So John Charles Wesley were ordained there at Christ Church. Move on to the next slide. One of the things that we had to do as students is each one of us had to take a place within our journey. And can't really hardly even see him. He's right there. His name's Jay Morgan. He was the one that did the talk in this facility, and we had to take one of John Wesley's messages. We had to totally rewrite it to fit today's vernacular without losing the content that John Wesley intended. That was the assignment that was given. And so Jay Morgan is going to be doing the talk here, right here. You can see the elevated, little spiral elevated place where the pastor or the priest would stand. They were Anglican. And so that's where they would have preached from. Jay did not get to go up there and preach. I think he would have liked to, but because it's so old and almost museum, he stood down on the floor. That's pretty much roped off. Nobody goes up there anymore. John Wesley was a student here, as we mentioned, but when he graduated, next slide, John Wesley attended Lincoln, well, not attended, he was a fellow. That's the same thing as professor. A fellow at Lincoln College. And again, it's all in the same complex. And so from 1726 to 1751, John Wesley taught here. This was the chapel in Lincoln College. This was the chapel. And then we ventured not only in to look at the chapel here. I think the next slide has a picture of the glass doors going in. Oh, that's the curator. I just kind of enlarged that. But then we have, it actually says John Wesley Fellow, and then it gives those same dates that I mentioned. They have that etched right on the glass doors as you're going in there. We did go outside. We went up another staircase, and this is John Wesley's study. When he was a professor, when he was a fellow, this is John Wesley's room. That's my son Reuben there. And the next slide has me sitting at John Wesley's desk. And I was so afraid of hurting an old piece of furniture that I wasn't really sitting. I was just squatting, making it look like I was. And I told my son, I said, take it fast. This isn't a comfortable position to be in. So anyway, I'm going to go one more slide, and that's the last one for today. This is a picture of Charles Wesley. I'm going to deal more with Charles Wesley next week. And this is where the Wesley, what we said, who are we, where are we, why are we here, where are we going, how do we become Wesleyan? And what I really have in my mind is this: when we finish the very last session, probably won't have as much pictures, but I want to share with us that we are not Wesleyan because we are a follower of John Wesley. Any more than a Baptist is a follower of whoever, you know. We're not following a man. But there were some principles that John and Charles Wesley implemented in how to interpret the Word of God. And it's what many scholars have referred to as the quadrilateral. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But the reason why I'm showing you the picture of Charles before we get into this study, maybe a little more of Charles and what happened and how this Methodist movement really became. John Wesley went through the college, Oxford University, graduated with Master of Arts, did his baccalaureate and his master's degree all in one place, and now is a fellow, now is a teacher at Lincoln College. Charles Wesley comes to the same college to study, and he sees such lethargy, he sees such lukewarmness, he sees things that are actually sin rampant in what is supposed to be a Christian college. You know that Princeton, Yale, and Harvard were all started as Bible colleges at one time? Well, that's what they were dealing with at Oxford. And Charles probably came to the room where Reuben was and where I was, and I have pictures of Dr. Weissel in there too. I didn't feel like I should just do a total slide of everything. I can't. I mean, we'd be here for a year to do 1,200 slides. But this is probably the room where Charles came to visit John, and he said, how in the world did you maintain a spiritual life in this environment? And John said, well, these were the disciplines that I practiced. And of course, Charles goes back. He shares with George Whitfield, who was also a student there at Oxford, and there was two other guys, and that's where the Holy Club started. Charles Wesley went back, and his classmates, and then, of course, John saw what was happening, and he joined that. I have a book in my library I did by a man named Gill, and the title of the book was Charles Wesley, the First Methodist. And when you really study the life, it's not brought out very often, but Charles really was the mastermind behind most of it, more than what he gets credit for. And for what it's worth, I may try to correct that just a little bit. But anyway, they were both very, very vitally moved in it. John Wesley, you will note, was the better of the preachers, or the more powerful of the preachers. Charles Wesley gave himself pretty much to hymn writing, although he was a circuit riding preacher and traveled on horseback and preached just like John Wesley did, but he just is known more for his hymns. I think it was 7,000 hymns he wrote. Go through the hymnal, you'll probably find 4 or 5 of thousands. Anyway, that's the reason why I added Charles on here, because it was probably in that room where Charles came to visit his brother. How in the world did you survive spiritually in this terrible environment in the so-called Christian college? And then John shared with him his disciplines, and then Charles is now putting these into practice with his friends, and then John joins them. So anyway, that's our lesson for this evening. I don't know that there really was a whole lot of struggle that way. What I will say is this: John and Charles very early in life had agreed that neither one would do anything without their brother's permission. And John was sick, and he had somebody waiting on him, a maid that was waiting on him, and I guess throughout the course of it, he started having feelings toward her, and he had never asked Charles, because even John did give permission from Charles to date and marry the wife that he did. They agreed that we will keep each other accountable. And John did not get Charles's permission. And John Wesley had a very difficult life. His wife was a tyrant. She didn't like his preaching, didn't like his ministry. And I guess he was away from home a lot, and that probably isn't good for, And so I'm not going to argue that there's maybe a little wrong on both sides. But others have mentioned that probably, dare I say it, because of a nagging woman or whatever, it drove him out of the house, and so he probably was able to devote himself more to ministry than what he would have if he had a kind, loving wife. But depression, I don't know that he had time for it. I mean, that man was busy. Well, and I'm not saying, it didn't come across in any of our studies, but I'm not necessarily the expert witness on everything of their life. I'm just... Yeah, he was disconnected maritally, very much so. And so he had some real difficult with marriage life. He'd actually fallen in love when they were missionaries. He came over to the States in Savannah, Georgia, to the American Indian to save the heathen. And he had an experience there where he was falling in love with a girl, and she liked another guy, but she told him she liked him better, John better, and but then she ended up running off with this other guy, getting married, and John Wesley refused to serve her communion the very next Sunday, and that was about the end of their missionary experience. They boarded a boat and head back for London after that. It was either that or he probably would have been locked up in jail, because that's something you don't do, withhold communion, because back then communion it still almost followed Lutheranism, but not quite. Roman Catholic transubstantiation, trans meaning it literally becomes the body and blood of Christ. Luther said, no, it's consubstantiation. His presence is with you. And then we kind of break it down a little further. No, it's a symbolic thing. But back then it was pretty close to consubstantiation, even in the Anglican Church. And so if this is me partaking of Christ, and I don't get to have my communion, I don't get Christ within me for this week. And that was almost a criminal offense for a pastor to withhold communion at that time. And so he got himself into religious and political trouble and pretty much escaped jail by getting on a ship real quick and going back. That's another question. I do not. I didn't get any of them. They gave them at the location, and then they submitted that to Dr. Weitzel, the professor, and of course they would get whatever grade they got by their performance whatsoever. Next week, when we're going to do a little more on Charles Wesley, I probably will read a lot of my manuscript, because I went to Dr. Weitzel and I said, listen, my mom was raised Free Methodist, and in the old 1950 edition of their hymnal, they had 30 or 40 of Charles Wesley's hymns in, much more than what most of the current hymnals have. And I said, I grew up singing an awful lot of those songs, and that was the one and only place that we stopped in Bristol where Charles Wesley was the pastor, and so that wasn't on any of our talks. Everyone was supposed to take one of John Wesley's locations. I said, can I deviate? Can I have Charles Wesley's The Music of the Movement was the title. And so I did that one. And of course my research, that's where I ended up finding that book by Gill. It actually was my grandfather's book and in his library, and my dad got it. And then when my dad showed him his, I scarfed that one up real quick. But so we'll find a little more about Charles. Then we'll kind of mix their lives back together and bring us to where we are today. All right, a little something different. pray and then we'll dismiss. Father, we thank you for these men of God. John said, if you could just give me a half a dozen men that are sold out to God and working, and we can transform the world. And the known world at that time, he pretty much did. His influence over one man's influence over 300 or 400 preachers, spreading both continents, here in London, Scotland, Ireland, all the British Isles, and they were ready for economic and political collapse in Britain, and it just revived the entire country. What an amazing thing took place, all because one man decided to give himself 100% wholeheartedly to the work of God. And we may aspire to do better. I doubt I'll ever come close. I've said different times I wish I could be half of what my dad was. I'd be happy, but help us to be what you want us to be, and strive, emulate your presence and